Welcome to the Paranormal Pendle podcast, coming to you from the heart of Pendle Witch Country in the northwest of England. My name is Craig Bryant, author, investigator and collector of stories. Join me as we take a journey into the paranormal, UFO sightings, cryptozoology and big cats. This is the Paranormal Pendle podcast. Welcome to episode 42 of Paranormal Pendle, broadcasting to the Paranormal UK network at paukradio.com. And for those who've got eagle eyes or eagle ears, whichever way you look at it, I've actually got the episode number right this time. The last episode I did with Gary Jones, I actually mentioned that it was the wrong episode number. So I've got the right episode number. We are definitely on number 42. My guest on this episode is actually a returning guest. Great guest the first time round. Really looking forward to chatting to him again. Author and researcher Richard Rokeby. Richard has written a best-selling book, The Lights Upon the Hills, about the Burton Dassett UFO event of 1923. And I'm talking to him today really because he's got some updated research. And we're also going to have a chat about a few other subjects as well, hopefully. So, Richard, it's absolutely great to have you back. Thanks for coming back on again.
Yeah, good evening, Craig. Thanks very much for asking me.
No problem. Can I just ask what the weather's like where you are? Because it's absolutely freezing cold here, and we've had a bit of snow, and it's all very frosty, and it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas as this.
It is, yeah. So it's bright, but it's cold but bright here. So we have the best of both worlds. We've had a bit of sun.
Yeah,
a bit of frost on the ground, but cold and fresh. It's nearly at that C word, isn't it? But I tend to push mine back as close as possible to the actual day. Bar humbug! I know everyone's shouting, but that's the way I roll.
Absolutely. I think I'm becoming more enamored by Christmas the older I get. I seem to go the opposite way to most people. I've been badgering Mrs. Bryant to put the Christmas tree up for the last one. So,
right.
I think it's going up this weekend, so I'm looking forward to it.
There's no law against it, so you get your tree up whenever you want.
There isn't, although I do tend to shout at houses that I've got them up in November. Anyway, we digress. Let's talk about your book. The Lights Upon the Hills, the Burton Dassett UFO events. What's the crux of the story then? What happened back in 1923?
Yeah, so a bit of background. I originally wrote the book during COVID. I worked through COVID. I was a police officer, but in the downtime, I managed to produce this book, which was going to be an article for the great Outer Limits magazine, but it was viewed by Philip Mantle, who suggested to make a book out of it, Flying Disc Press. So I did that in 2019 and got it published through Flying Disc Press in November 2020. And I was really pleased with it. And I got really good reception. Really surprised, really, at the reception it got. And I was on the podcast such as yourselves, a great podcast such as yourselves, and then America, and got really good response. But I always felt I could have put more into it. And there was other research I could do, and I felt that 100 years from the event, there might be something which may happen, which would be worth writing about. So I decided when I retired a couple of years ago that I would rewrite the book and update it, which is what I've done now. So it's now twice the size as it was. New research, fresh research from me. I also managed to get access to Dr. David Clarke's Spooklights paper, which was very helpful. So I managed to get all that in and put it into a new updated book, which I've now published on Amazon. So I've self-published it now on Amazon. Okay. But the initial story started sort of December 1922, where lights that were described, which were attributed to ghosts at the time, were seen on Burton Dassett Hills. Now, Burton Dassett Hills is in Warwickshire, right in the centre of England. It's about 20 miles south of Birmingham, about 20 miles north of Oxford.
Mm-hmm.
And generally, Warwickshire is a flattish, rolling countryside type area. So I often describe it like the Shire out of Middle Earth. But within that, our Mordor, if you like, is a series of 5 hills that reach up on the western side of the county.
Okay.
They're not particularly big by mountain standards. You know, it's not the lakes or the Cheviots or anything like that. In fact, they're about 692 feet is probably the highest one. But they're very prominent because everything else is relatively flat. And these 5 hills have had a history in themselves. There was a village up there, the village of Burton Dassett, up to the Middle Ages. There's a church there, which I could come on to. In more recent times, there was a military base that was suspiciously, in my mind, built in 1943, directly opposite Burton Dassett.
Okay.
So you've got this sort of area, but in 1922, by then it was a recreational area, just like it is now. It's a county park, so people can go up there and spend their summers and winters walking around it, walking the dog, taking in the sights, etc. In 1922, it was often, you know, a pastime would be to go up into the hills and have a walk around. But they started to get these reports of by various different local residents. Really, it started off of lights we're seeing traveling at different speeds, different altitudes on the hills and going over the hills, and particularly around the church. And the stories start to grow until it gets national press, local press go the Banbury Gazette do a big feature on it and send reporters up to see these lights, and then the Birmingham Times, the London Times, all start sending reporters to the area to report on these lights, which are seen and recorded. And I detail the reports from the newspapers and from the locals, sort of in the book. And the lights are attributed to ghosts. I think completely understandably, because in 1922 we've still suffering from the First World War. Warwickshire was hit as hard as any English or British county. Whole villages the menfolk could be wiped out in a single battle.
Of course.
We'd had the Spanish flu, which did have its effects over here, but not as bad as it did perhaps on the continent. So a lot of people had lost their loved ones, and spiritualism, which had started off in around about 1867, where I think it was the Fox sisters brought it over from America following the Civil War. It had a sort of renaissance after the First World War. So people would attribute these lights to ghosts, despite them not being what you would call traditional ghostly sightings. And I think people wanted to go up and see these lights as a sort of corroboration for their own spiritualist views at that time. You know, there was some hope that if there was ghosts on Burton Dassett Hills, then there was an afterlife and they would see their sons again. So I think that's part of the reason it got the attention it did, was because of when it happened. But you know, this is very early on in UFO sightings. Looking back now, of course they had the Fatima, the miracle of Fatima, which some people attribute to UFOs. Some people say it was a Christian miracle, but some people attribute it to UFOs, including Eric von Daniken. He talks at length about it. And a few other sightings. Had a few sightings in America in a crash ship at Aurora and places like that. But this is before there is any aircraft or drones or anything. Well, there is aircraft, but it's big, loud biplanes rather than small lights like this. So yeah, and I guess I found the story initially in a book entitled "The Ghosts of Warwickshire" by Betty Smith, who's quite a famous local historian, and completely understandable why it was portrayed in 1920s and later on as ghosts. But I just felt, looking back through the prism of what we know about UFOs now, or UAPs, to me it was a very well recorded, multi-witnessed UFO event. And that was certainly the sort of angle I took in the book, and the conclusion I came to in the book. When you rule out all the other theories and hypotheses, which I have done, and I detail why it couldn't have been many of other things, then you are left, if you trust the reports that all these people have made, then you are left with a UFO event. That's all really only thing it can really be.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if it had been sort of one or two reports, you could probably dispel most theories with regards to UAPs or UFOs. But it is interesting that we're talking 100 years ago, and obviously manned flight was, despite the great leaps forward in technology during the First World War, manned flight was still in its infancy. And it is interesting that actually, I mean, I have come across quite a few reports from around about the turn of the century and into the 20s and 30s, certainly up until the Second World War, where there did seem to be a spate of UFO sightings in different areas of the country. Obviously, I'm in the northwest of England, and there were quite a number in the 1920s and the 1930s in this area as well. So perhaps these were sort of like part of a pattern.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like I've done with this, people attributed them to different things at the time. So that we have the ghost rockets, don't we, around about in the Scandinavian countries around about 1930 odd, which were attributed to Nazi Germany. Again, right. Understandably. It wasn't just the Northwest. In Hull, and I think about 1907, there was a report of a craft, we'd call it now, going in and out the Humber, a bright craft going in and out the Humber and seen by lots of people. So, yeah, there certainly were the reports there happening, and in some ways, we need to push back the reports of UFO sightings beyond 1947, which tends to get, tends to be shown as the starting point.
Yeah.
But there is a good body of evidence to say it was happening. There was regular sightings in that early sort of turn of the 20th century.
Yeah, and I've got no doubt that it goes back in history further than that as well.
Yes, yeah, without a doubt, I would say without a doubt. And it's to do with the record keeping, I guess.
That's and right. Yeah.
As the record keeping's got better, then suddenly, in my view, it's not a question, do UFOs exist anymore? You'd like to say that case has been settled. It now moves on to what are they and why, I guess. But
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, there was one in the 16th century in Germany, I think, wasn't that very famous one?
Yeah. It was at Nuremberg.
I think that's the one. Yeah, that it just reminded you of mentioning that. So yeah, I mean, going back, maybe hundreds of years, I think it's really interesting. So what? I mean, obviously, you did a massive amount of research when you wrote the first version of the book, but the updated book, from what you're saying, is now twice the size of the original one. So, what sort of new evidence did you find then when you went looking for it?
So I suppose with the initial encounter in 1922 to February 23, I managed to get hold of more details of the reports from the paper. So originally I was working with just the Banbury Gazette and a few references to the London Times, but I managed to get hold of some more information. A lot came from Dr. David Clarke's Spook Lights, which he which is a really interesting paper written by him and a number of others, which talks about lights generally going around the country, and the lights that have been seen near churches and will-o'-the-wisps, etc. But he does talk about Burton Dassett in the context of it being a spook-like flap, is how he describes it.
Right.
And that give us a lot more, give me a lot more information, and pointed me towards some of the papers that did more, sent up reporters. So that the Birmingham Times and London Times sent up reporters to see if they could find these lights, and very often they did. There's a really good report of a journalist from the London Times who's been sent up, very skeptical. Spends a bit of time in the pub with the locals, waiting to go out just as it's turning dark, to see if he can see these lights. And he troops up the hill to try and look for the lights, and he's sort of saying, "Well, I didn't see anything that was that unusual that couldn't be explained." He ends up on Windmill Hill, which is the tallest hill of the five, and he's looking out just as the sun goes down, and he describes how he saw a golden orb drop down from the clouds and illuminate the cloud base.
Huh?
So you can imagine, as it's turning dark and this object comes down from the clouds and is so bright to cast its light onto the bottom of the clouds, and then sees it zip off at speed to the horizon is absolutely amazed as to what he's seen. And other reporters have come in, and they managed to talk to locals that have seen the lights. And then there's one where I did mention it in the first book, a man called George Cottrell, who's a local groom, and he sees a light, bluish light, which is near a pond, and it freaks out the horse that he's with, and this light is seen to be moving around at speed and across the hills. That was to be later attributed to the ufologist's nemesis, that is marsh gas, many years later. But it clearly wasn't marsh gas. But then that reporter actually bumps into somebody further down the road that also sees the light traveling down North End Village, and he steps out and he sees this light coming at him. So within an hour or so, maybe less than half a mile away, that George Cottrell account is corroborated by somebody else. So the paper, the new information we got very often corroborated accounts that we knew we already had. So there was my favorite account is the railwayman, who was in a railway observation signal box, and he sees an orange orb, perhaps similar to the one that the reporter seen from Windmill Hill, fly down and just sort of stop in front of his signal box, and he panics and he doesn't know what to do. I'm going to get some more details about that account, and the signalman was called W. Corbett. And it says how he grabs the giant spanner that they used for changing the signals back then, and goes out to confront this craft. But fortunately, perhaps for the craft flew off at that point. But he did ring it through to the nearby station, who said ring it through to the police. The police sent out a vehicle to take it account. I mean, they're really solid accounts these people have seen, and for a signalman to do that back then, when it's threatening his livelihood, really, if people had taken it wrong, he would have just been out of a job, because he had a very responsible job. But he was willing to put his livelihood on the line,
his reputation,
reputation on the line as well, to report this. And I think that's partly because there were so many reports around at that time. He felt safe enough to do so. Excuse me. So I brought in some more information from that, some more accounts from the paper. We managed to put some more names to people. There is a good account which was it was a lady that worked in the vicarage as a maid, and previously her account was that she just saw a light. She saw a light as she was walking to work in the vicarage through Burton Dassett. She saw one of these lights, which she describes going hither and thither across the hills. So you imagine it go backwards and forwards, up and down, and it's a light that's moving. But I managed to get some more information although this lady isn't named, her great granddaughter is, and the story was passed down to her firsthand about what she saw. And she states that she did see the light going when she was walking to work and went to work as a maid in the vicarage. But then she had a period of time where every time she poked her head out the door to look at it, the light would appear. And she would poke her head back in, and then she'd try and do it again, and she'd poke her head out, and the light would appear again. So, this is an intelligent light form, or it's showing some degree of intelligence. So that was really good as well, and it all corroborates, what I had detailed first time round. Again, another favorite story of mine is George White and his three friends that go up onto the hill with the view of saying it's a load of nonsense, and then they see a light go over them, and what George White says is he felt it go over him.
Right.
So again, this is something changing the atmosphere, perhaps giving off downward pressure. It's something tangible. All these things to me say that this was a UFO UAP event, rather than something more wistful or natural.
That's interesting, isn't it? I mean, there's obviously then the more you sort of delved into it, the more first-hand accounts you seem to be finding, and there does seem to be a lot from from people of varied, shall we say, social standing at the time, because obviously you had the maid who was obviously slightly down on the social scale, shall we say, from the guy who was the signal man on the railway. So there's quite a cross section of the population in the area that are seeing these things, isn't there?
Yeah, there is, and I think it was probably seen by hundreds of people, but it was the ones that made it into the papers or made it into local accounts were the tip of the iceberg. People were going up to see these lights just for this short period of time. 3 months really. But I think it was seen by hundreds of people. But it was lost. But for the national papers to get involved, the surge of reports must have been such that they felt they needed to send people to it.
Yeah, I mean the guy from from London, the journalist from London, I think I'd quite like to have been a fly on the wall when he got back to his paper in London after his experience. Because I mean, I think a lot of journalists start from and no disrespect to journalists, but they start from a position of looking for any reason to debunk these sort of stories, and then obviously if something like that happened to him, and it obviously sounded like quite a dramatic sighting that he had, I can just imagine how that must have affected him.
Yeah, and I think it was, and again, they wouldn't back then. It wasn't just an hour and 20 minutes up the M40. To get people from London, they have to put a lot of effort to get journalists up there to see it. But it is funny to say about how the journalists haven't changed. So when I first released the book on Boxing Day, the Star ran an article about my book with the headline, "UFologists believe ghosts of World War One soldiers are UFOs," which wasn't what my intention was at all. But some things never change.
No, they don't. Of course, headlines like that sell papers, don't they? So
it's more likely to get attention. But there we are.
Yeah, no, but it's a bit unfair, isn't it? Because it's not what you found, and it's not what you talk about, is it? So, but,
No, it's not. But
but
yeah, there we are.
100 years on, and nothing changes, does it? So,
No, that's right. Yeah,
I suppose you could
that's
say
right.
the
But
same thing about politicians as well, but we won't go.
yeah, yes, yeah.
So, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, then, that it was over such a short period of time. It was only over, what, about 3 months. And I assume that it started abruptly, sorry, and ended abruptly. I mean, is there any indication at all as to why it was just this 3 month period?
No, there isn't. I mean, I guess if we knew the reason why the lights were there, that would help us. But it stopped by end of February 1923. After that, strangely, there was an earthquake.
Okay.
Now I know Warwickshire might seem a funny place for earthquakes, but I remember 2002 when we just moved up into the area. There was an earthquake where we lived, which was, I don't know, maybe 10 miles away from Burton Dassett itself. So Warwickshire does get the occasional earthquake, but they are few and far between. But I think it was around March or April 1923 that the area did suffer an earthquake or be subject to an earthquake. So that maybe feeds in to the Earth light, spook light type theory of what these lights were. But I have discounted that because the Earth lights, like the ones in the Norway, the Hasselden lights in Norway, etc.,
Oh.
they have been videoed and they're quite short lived, really, and don't seem to be acting with any purpose. Whereas the descriptions we get from the lights of Burton Dassett do seem to have some sort of purpose to them.
Mm.
And yeah, I mean, again, I like to think of them as one of two things: either probes that have come down and looking at the area because the area has some geological interest to them, or intelligent life forms, which I know is a term Paul Sinclair coined for his sightings out on the northeast coast, and the intelligent life form hypothesis, I do think fits a lot,
Mm.
and I describe, I go into in the book some accounts of commercial pilots who have seen and had real interactions with intelligence life forms, and the more I read, the more we research about them, that does seem to be um, uh, more likely, I think, than perhaps mechanical nuts and bolts craft. I do think there is something in this intelligent life form
So it's
phenomena.
almost a sort of entity in itself, rather than something mechanical, as you said.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I mean, I was very much in the nuts and bolts camp, and
Mm.
these light objects being extraterrestrial origin. I guess I've moved somewhat more towards interdimensional um, origins, or certainly that as a possibility.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, because the intelligent light form phenomena, they do seem to be, for want of a better word, creatures in their own right with their own intelligence that can appear and disappear, move, search for things. And again, I give a description of in the book of how one of these lights illuminated a house as if looking for something.
Mm.
And the person in the house described it as enough to read by.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So there is something in that, and
It's very
yeah.
War
So
of
I
the Worlds, isn't it?
yeah, it does, yeah.
A little bit
Um,
sort of spine tingling, really, isn't it?
yeah, it is. I mean, what were they doing? But yeah, so I managed to find, just through my research of intelligent life forms, I found a really interesting story of a commercial pilot that, whilst on a flight between Germany and England had a sighting. Him and his co-pilot had a sighting of two intelligence life forms, and then I don't want to spoil it for the people that want to buy the book, but basically he has an amazing experience, interaction with that light form that goes on for a period of time afterwards, and yeah, quite a remarkable story, which has never been published before. So yeah, that is in the book as well, which I'm really pleased about.
So can I just tease a little bit out of you? I don't want you to go into it too much, because it'll deter people from buying the book, and I'm all for fellow authors. Yeah.
Well, so he was on a flight, and he saw a light very similar to what was described in Burton Dassett in that time, 1922, 1923, and he's flying a cargo plane actually, and he sees two lights coming towards him, green lights, and he knows they're not aircraft lights because they're on the wrong side. Right. So in order for them to be at the side he's seeing him, it means the plane's flying backwards. Right. And he wakes up his co-pilot, and these two lights approach him at speed, and one goes above the plane and one goes underneath the plane. And the one above he manages to see fly off. The one that goes underneath he loses track of. I'm not sure where that went, but there is a remarkable story of what he says happened to him after he saw that light.
And it's interesting you mention about the geology as well, just going back to the area around where all these lights were being seen, because I agree that there is something to do with geology, with a lot of these repeated sightings and areas where there are a number of sightings. And I just thought it was interesting that you mentioned that there was an earthquake shortly afterwards, and I wonder if there's a correlation between the two things.
Yeah, it would certainly lend itself to that if we go down the Earth light theory, and also we have the Rollright stones, which are 10 miles sort of due northeast of Burton Dassett. Now the Rollright stones are an ancient monument, date from something around the time of Stonehenge, so 2500 BC, something like that. And they're a ring of stones that are only a sort of knee high. Some of them are a bit bigger than that, but they go from knee high up to maybe chest head height. And the interesting thing about that is, so the legend goes, is no matter how many times you count them, you never get the same number twice. I mean, I've tried that and it does work. So there's somewhere, but even in the guidebooks, they say there's somewhere between 79 to 85 stones, because no one's ever really got to the bottom of how many there is.
That's interesting.
But that has been an area of reporting of blue lights, earth lights being seen there. So they're not too far away. And the ground of Burton Dassett is built on an iron ore rock foundation, and so much so it was used for mining in the sort of Dark Ages, and the for getting mine out. So when you go to the park, there is lots of scoops out of the ground, which are small open cast mines, which probably date from the Dark Ages, and so right up until 1919. So during the First World War, there was a railway line that went up to the top of the hills because it was used for mining, and the iron ore was being taken out for the First World War. So the geology of the area is important, and again, this may be out at left field, but I did feel it was important to include it in the book, is because you've you've got these three main hills that are on the west side of the park, and they very much match up with Orion's belt. So they have that two parallel and one slightly off formation. And you know, I've done it myself. You go up there in February, and Orion as a constellation, and it looks like Orion is stood on the hills, and Orion's belt correlates to the hills below it, sort of thing, which again I find fascinating. And it was one of those things with all of Burton Dassett. If it was just one thing on its own, then you would probably discount it. But it has all these factors, these sightings, the church, the military base, the links to Orion, the witchcraft, and all these sort of things, all in the sort of same area. So, so just going back to your point, Craig, it is one of the reasons that it could be these type of Earth lights, but the witness reports, that we have gathered, do say that the lights do seem to have a purpose. They, you know, interact with people. They're scanning the area. They're moving in purposely as if searching for something. So I don't think they are the Earth lights, but I can completely understand why people would think that. And I suppose with all these things, you know, the book is there, the information is there. People will make their own minds up as to what it was.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. There's obviously a lot of different factors, isn't there? It's one of those areas that there seem to be a lot of different different factors that all sort of come together that you can sort of see why it will be an area of you know, high instances of these strange types of phenomena.
Yeah, I mean, again, you know, so I mentioned within the book we do have these areas. Pendle is one, Rendlesham Forest is another, and you just in the UK, that is, you know, and you tend to find that these areas have a depth of high strangeness.
That's right.
Going back a long time, and that has something to do with it. And you know, a lot of people that know the subject far better than me would say that they are all connected, even as far as, you know, dogmen and werewolves and various different sightings all seem to be connected around these areas. But you know, I mean, I have primarily concentrated on the ufology angle. Yeah. I do drift a bit into witchcraft, but that's what I'm looking at. But I've no doubt there is many strange things that happen in. I mean, Burton Dassett Country Park. It's quite small. You know, it's maybe 1.5 miles by 1.5 miles. It's not a big area, and you can walk around it in an afternoon or a morning.
So it's quite.
But it has all these sort of areas within it.
Quite concentrated then.
Yeah, it's very concentrated. You drive up to it. It's a very steep drive up to it, and then you're on the sort of plateau with the 5 hills there. There's a wood at the back of it. The church is down a sort of a side lane, and you can pass between North End and Fenny-Compton, the 2 villages. And a lot of people have said to me how they've bought the book and then gone to the area and used the book as a bit of a guidebook, which I think is a great thing to do.
Absolutely. So you mentioned witchcraft, which is a subject that I'm quite interested in, obviously because of where I live. I mean, is there a history of witchcraft in the area? Do you think that might have anything to do with historical sightings?
I'm not sure about the sightings, but there was witchcraft connected with the area, definitely. So what sparked my interest on the witchcraft is one of the updates. I did a number of new updates on my own personal experiences in the area in the new book, and I was I do tours sometimes, so people can contact me on my email, and I'll take them for a walk around the area and show them the area and explain the story. And a couple of fellow authors actually came up to see me, and we had to walk around the area, and we walked into Fox Covert Wood, which is a small wood on the eastern side, back of the hills really. And there is a clearing which is about halfway around a path which takes you around the wood, which I have done a bit of wild camping there before, and it is a perfect area for that sort of thing. But it was always clear before, and it was unspoilt. But this time, when we walked in there, so this would have been about May 2022. When we walked in, as you approach the area, a pentagram had been sprayed, it looked like, with white spray onto a tree as you approached it in a circle. And on one side of the tree on the floor, there was a dotted line, and the other one there was a solid line. So it was clearly an entrance into an area. So you walk through the dotted line, and there's a sort of loosely marked out path. And it took you into this sort of natural cathedral, natural arena, really, where there was a tree in the center. Again, it had the pentagon symbol sprayed on. And then another symbol, which was a bit like an hourglass type symbol and triangles. And then on the trees, there were strange symbols or letters and numbers, all in a circle. And it was immaculate. It had been cleared out. There's no rubbish there, anything. And then every so often there was these little constructions of branches where I would say two people could sit in with evidence that fires had been lit there. So I walked around and took photos of it all, and I put some photos into the book. And it really sort of piqued me interest as to, well, the fact it was happening modern day and what it all meant. So I carried out a bit of research. I thought, who's going to know about this? Well, a witch will know about it, possibly, if it's Wiccan or pagan. I was happy that it wasn't satanic, because of the little I knew, the way the pentagons were. They had the star at the top rather than the two stars either side, which is supposed to look like a goat and symbolize the devil. So I was happy it was a pentagon and a Wicca or pagan area rather than a satanic area. So I thought, well, I'll need to speak to somebody that does do witchcraft. So I managed to find a lady in Glastonbury, and she told me what it was and what all the symbols meant and what her theory was around it. And I think the thing, she was in one way pleased to see it, and she gave an explanation, which I detail in the book, of what it might be all about. But what she was a bit dismayed at was the fact that what should have been used to mark out these areas was ash rather than spray paint. So that gave her a clue as to who she thought had done it. But it was really interesting. And then from there, I looked back in the area, and there had been a couple of satanic murders, and the reason why they were classed as satanic murders, because there was a murder just after the war where a normal, perhaps well-to-do, mild-mannered man had gone a bit awry and killed a random woman in the street with a pitchfork.
Okay.
So the death by a pitchfork is traditionally a way that you could kill a witch, I suppose.
Oh, okay. I've never heard that one.
This is what I'd come across as well. And then that was just before the war, and then round about, I think it was 1903 or something like that, a police constable in the Cape was supposed to be patrolling the Lion pub in Ferny Compton, disappeared from his beat, but was found in the Oxford Canal a couple of days later, and he'd been killed with a pitchfork. And they would never found anybody for that murder. So that there is, and again, I'll go into more details within the book, but there is these two satanic murders that were in that area. So dating back to the turn of the 20th century again, but no doubt going back a lot further. And when you look at the map, what's remarkable to me is the area where this pagan Wicca site is
Mm.
is exactly mirror image of where All Saints Church is, just the other side
Oh,
of the park. So it's almost as if it's been chosen out because it's the opposite
mm.
of the Christian church.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I mean, you mentioned the last time we spoke about the Christian church. I mean, just briefly, that's quite an interesting building in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So All Saints Church is sometimes called the Cathedral of the Cotswolds. It started off as a Saxon nave, but in the 8th, 9th century, was recorded in the Domesday Book following the Norman conquest, which I think Domesday Book was 1087, as a Saxon nave. But around about the 14th century, it receives a big uplift in cash, probably Templar cash. And the Knights Templar were based at they had a base at Temple Hedwick, which is directly opposite and more or less underneath now the military base of MOD Kyneton. But it did have a big uplift in money, the church, and within the church it also had these paintings, which are initially as you walk into the church, there is paintings of the Virgin Mary and Saint Michael above the eastern sort of side of the church, and they're fantastic in their own right, more than life size. And then on the left-hand side of the wall, there is pictures of what's described as a gargoyle or an angel type character. It doesn't look like either, to be honest. But there's a strange character that's drawn on the wall. And then there's two kings, and there's different stories around that. But one king is holding a head, and that's believed to be the official literature, if you like, would say that these paintings are 14th century paintings of 9th century kings, and that king who's holding his old head is King Ethelbert, who was beheaded in Winchester, not too far away. And then another king, which the church would say is a magi, so one of the three wise men, because he is holding a bottle in his left hand up into the air. Now that bottle to me looks like a child's top. It's got undulating lines on it, perhaps to give the appearance that it is spinning. But the real eureka moment for me was when I first saw that painting of the king with this orb or bottle on his hand, is that the bottle is not resting on his hand. It's floating about 2 or 3 inches, sorry, above his hand. It's been deliberately portrayed as floating. So it's a revolving orb floating in the air. And when you look at everything else that's going on at Burton Dassett, my view is that is maybe depicting a UAP, an unidentified flying object that was seen perhaps in the 9th century by a local king, and they wanted to claim the kudos of it, claim control of it.
Yeah.
But again, the pictures are in the book, and I would just ask anyone to have a look and see what you think. I mean, there has been some erosion, either deliberately, because I'll be honest, the church hasn't been either in 2019 or when I updated the book, they haven't been that forthcoming, which is a bit of a shame, really. But so it's either they have this erosion between the hand and the bottom of the object, but you can clearly see that the hand is 2-3 inches below this floating orb. So the church is interesting in itself, but I wonder if these paintings are telling us another story. And as well as that, we have unusual carvings on one side of the church, the north side of the church, which does face Burton Dassett, which is traditionally the evil side of a church. So gargoyles, etc., would be put on that side. So there's none on the other side, but on the north side of the church, there's these fantastic carvings which depict the Green Man, which is often associated with two worlds, generally Christianity and paganism joining together. But strange animals, half lizard, half men type animals, half dragon, half men animals, and two creatures which are upside down. So where you've normally got their feet are on the bottom, two creatures are actually upside down, as if perhaps floating up in the air. So the carvings and the paintings, I think, are key to the mystery of Burton Dassett, really.
Yeah, I mean the imagery that sort of coming into my mind as you're explaining them, I think it's quite interesting. Especially the holding the floating orb or whatever it was. I think it's really interesting. And then you have to wonder, where they were getting the ideas for these sort of quite fantastical creatures from as well. I mean, did they actually see these things?
Yeah, I mean, we don't know. I mean, the carvings are 14th century as well, and the other churches, cathedrals, have carvings without a doubt. But I think the ones here are just a strange collection. There's a lot of strange carvings as opposed to your traditional angel heads and people's heads, etc. There is these strange animals. I mean, the green man depicted isn't that common in Christian churches either.
No, it's a pagan thing, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, it's generally a pagan thing, but it was often like a lot of things that the Christianity did was try and supersede paganism, pagan festivals, etc. with sort of Christian dogma.
Yeah.
So the pagan was say the green man was often used as the joining together of paganism and Christianity. But it's still quite rare. And then you've got these. I mean, if you look down, I think there was 7 or 8 columns. Every single one has got something really unusual and interesting about it.
Yeah, I think it sounds like the church itself is worth a visit, let alone the area. And also, I mean, I wonder from what you just said there whether there was some sort of equally unexplainable event that perhaps happened back in the Dark Ages in the 13th or 14th century, that sort of prompted this almost like a visual record in the church of what people may have seen, because obviously they will have automatically linked anything strange that they saw to something that was maybe created by God, or some sort of vision of God or from God or something like that. So if there were strange things going on at that time in history, then that's how they'd interpret it, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think, and the fact that these paintings survived as well. So my understanding was, and I'm certainly no expert in medieval painting in churches, but my understanding is a lot of them were whitewashed over because of when the Puritans came in and because of the Reformation as well. But these seem to have survived. They haven't been whitewashed over. People seem to have known instinctively that they're special, and they needed to be preserved and seen. So I do think it's just more than decoration. I do think that those pictures are telling us a story, maybe about the UFOs. Other people would say that because they were probably created and paid for by the Knights Templar, are they depicting, the head of John the Baptist and the Holy Grail? I don't know, but people have put them theories forward. And again, I discussed them in the book as to various different theories around the paintings. But for me, when you take it into context and put it alongside the military bases and the sightings of 1922-23, I think it is showing, it is depicting, or certainly the Magi figure is depicting an object that was seen floating, flying around the area.
Well, it's an amazing story. It really is, and you've done some amazing research as well, and I think it's great how it all obviously comes together. It all obviously locks together and suggests that something is going on that we've not quite got that understanding for in that relatively small area, isn't it, as well, which is quite interesting. So yeah, I think it's a fascinating bit of research. You mentioned the books on Amazon.
Yeah, it's on Amazon Kindle and Amazon as a paperback. The paperback, I'm very proud. I was very keen with the paperback this time to have colour photos, because I really think it shows the details of the paintings and the carving. So we've got colour photos in this time. Yeah, available on Amazon, and yeah, I hope people enjoy it and make their own mind up. That's what I'm all about. I've put one theory for people. I'm more than willing to listen to people who disagree with me, and contact me if there's any points you want to make. All adds to the story, really.
Yeah. What's your contact details if people want to get in contact with you?
So my email is Richard Rokeby. Rokeby is Rokeby @yahoo.com.
Okay, excellent. Well, it's been really interesting talking to you again. I think it's a fascinating subject. I really do. There's lots of things in there, I think, that are quite thought provoking. Yeah, I just hope people buy the book because it's obviously been very well researched and put together. And good luck for any future projects that you've got on the go. Anything in the pipeline?
Well, firstly, Craig, thanks for having me on. I always enjoyed the show, and
my pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. I really, really enjoyed our chat. I still have a couple of ideas to research. The German flying saucer, Nazi flying saucer, Hitler's flying saucer, whatever you want to call it. That is a rabbit hole that you disappear down and is very dark. But I do feel that we've got to separate fact from fiction with those accounts. Did the Third Reich manage to get a flying saucer with anti-gravity technology flying, and if so, how and why, and what happened to that technology? I think it's a fantastic story, but it is a huge piece of work.
Yeah.
But I'm still chipping away at that, and then the other thing is my interest in remote viewing. I'm still working away at that, and again, that's to do with the Cold War and remote viewing, how that's going forward. Is that still in use now? So yeah, I have a couple of projects that keep me busy.
Well, we'll look forward to seeing the fruits of your labours on those two. Thanks again for coming on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's always great to speak to you, Richard. Take care, and we won't mention the C word, but have a great time anyway.
Yes, yeah, for the holiday period.
That's the one. That's the one.
Thanks you very much, Craig. Yeah, no, thank you, Craig. That's great.
No worries. Take care. Thank you. You can visit my website at www.craigbryant.co.uk. Paranormal Pendle will return, and remember to keep watching the shadows.